Gather close, and let me tell you a tale from a time long ago, under the warm African sun. It is the story of a king, a man of both great vision and great sorrow, named Shaka. He was a leader who saw a future where many separate clans could be united as a single, powerful nation, the Zulu Kingdom. With brilliant thought, he changed the way his people fought, not with spears thrown from afar, but with a new, powerful weapon held close in hand. His armies moved like a great buffalo. The main force was the mighty chest, while two flanking horns swept around to encircle their foes. This strategy made his kingdom strong, so strong that it would one day stand firm against the vast empires from across the sea. Yet, for all his foresight, Shaka would never see that proud future come to pass. For many years, Shaka ruled with a wisdom that built a nation from a scattering of people. He was a leader of such cleverness that he has been remembered as a great strategist, a figure who truly reshaped the lands of the South. But as seasons turned, a shadow began to grow in the king's heart. A deep, personal sadness fell upon him with the passing of his beloved mother. From this grief, a change began to stir. The firm discipline that had once forged a kingdom slowly hardened into a harsh and unyielding rule. The very ferocity that had protected his people from outsiders began to turn inward, and the king's heart, once set on building, became clouded with suspicion and fear. The weight of this sorrow became a burden too heavy for the kingdom to bear. The trusted advisors and family members who stood closest to the throne, who had once cheered his victories, now watched in growing dismay. They saw the suffering of their people and feared that the great nation Shaka had built would be torn apart from within. These were not foreign enemies, but his own uncles and brothers, the very men he relied upon. They found themselves facing a terrible and heartbreaking choice: to allow the king to continue on his dark path and watch everything they had built crumble, or to act and save the Zulu Kingdom from its own founder. And so, on a day when the sun hung in the September sky, a quiet conspiracy born of this desperate need came to pass. Within the royal homestead, surrounded by those he trusted most, the reign of the great King Shaka was brought to a sudden and silent end. It was not a grand battle that felled him, but a final, tragic act by those who believed they had no other way to save their home. His story remains not simply one of a mighty warrior, but a poignant reminder of how even the brightest light can be dimmed by shadow, and how the love for a people can sometimes lead to a most sorrowful deed. Long before he was a king, the boy named Shaka knew the deep ache of not belonging. His story begins not on a throne, but under the wide, lonely sky of exile. He was the son of a chieftain named kaSenzangakhona and a mother of great spirit, Nandi. But because their union did not follow the old customs of the tribe, a shadow fell upon them from the very beginning. To the small Zulu clan, Shaka and his mother were seen as outcasts, a reminder of a broken rule. Life within the chief's household was not one of comfort, but of quiet whispers and cold shoulders. The other children would point and tease, and the adults offered little kindness. Soon, the weight of this disapproval grew too heavy, and Shaka and his beloved Nandi were sent away, forced to wander the rolling hills and seek shelter with other clans. Yet no matter where they went, the whispers followed them, and doors that were opened soon gently closed again. They were always the guests who overstayed their welcome, forever living on the edges of society. It was in this hard school of hardship that the man was shaped. The constant humiliation, the struggle for every scrap of food and respect, forged in a young boy a will as strong as iron. He learned to be watchful, to be clever, and to be tough. He carried with him a deep, smoldering fire, a resentment for all those who had ever made his gentle mother bow her head in shame. This fire would one day become a great and terrible force. It would give him the strength to achieve impossible things, to rise higher than any had dreamed, but it was a flame that, left untended, would also threaten to consume all that he would later build. If you're still watching, it means you're an ambitious history lover, but without a subscription, the YouTube algorithm might not show you videos like this again. I hope we meet again. As the seasons turned, the young man, Shaka, grew strong and tall, his spirit still marked by the hardships of his youth. It was during this time that he found himself called to serve in the army of a great and powerful chief named Dingiswayo, leader of the Mthethwa. While other clans had shunned him, Chief Dingiswayo was a man of rare vision. He looked upon the intense and brooding young warrior and did not see an outcast. Instead, he saw a spark of raw, extraordinary potential waiting to be kindled. In the rigid drills of the army, Shaka's fierce nature, once a source of trouble, became his greatest gift. He was not content with the old ways of battle, where spears were thrown from a distance and conflicts were like dances with set steps. To Shaka, warfare was a serious science, and its only purpose was a complete and decisive victory. He trained with a relentless drive, his powerful frame and sharp mind quickly setting him apart from the other soldiers. He was a natural leader, and under the wise and watchful eye of Dingiswayo, he began to rise swiftly through the ranks. It was here, within this disciplined world, that the first embers of the great Zulu war machine began to glow. Shaka was not merely following the rules of war. He was quietly, carefully, rewriting them. He thought of new ways to organize the warriors, of new weapons that could be held fast in hand for close, decisive combat. He dreamed of formations that moved with the grace and power of a wild beast, surrounding an enemy completely. In the patient mentorship of Chief Dingiswayo, the resentful outcast was being honed into a military genius, and the foundations of a legacy that would shake the very earth of southern Africa were being laid, one thoughtful idea at a time. As Shaka grew in stature and responsibility within the army, he began to look upon the old ways of fighting with a thoughtful, yet critical, eye. He watched as warriors would stand at a distance, hurling light spears that often failed to decide a battle. To his mind, this was not a path to true victory. He believed that to secure a lasting win, one must have the courage to meet the enemy face to face in a contest of unwavering strength and resolve. From this belief, he brought forth a new kind of weapon, one that would become the very heart of his legend. A short, heavy spear with a broad, gleaming blade, designed not for throwing, but for the decisive work of close combat. This was the Ikawa, named for the distinct sound it made when drawn from a wound. To wield it, a warrior had to stand brave and firm, so near to his foe that he could see the reflection of his own shield in the other's eyes. But a new spear required a new way to carry a shield. Shaka introduced a larger, stronger shield made from hardened cowhide. This was not merely a wall to hide behind. It became a tool of the dance of battle. A warrior learned to use its top edge to hook his opponent's shield, pulling it aside to create a single, fleeting opening for the fatal, forward thrust of the Ikawa. Yet, his true genius lay not only in the tools of war, but in the spirit of the warriors who carried them. He gathered his men into disciplined regiments, known as Amabutho, organizing them not by their home villages, but by their age, forging bonds of brotherhood that were as strong as iron. He trained them with a gentle but firm insistence on perfection, having them run great distances over rough and thorny ground to toughen the soles of their feet until they were like leather. His most famous strategy was one he observed in nature itself: the horns of the buffalo. In this formation, the main body of his army, the great chest, would meet the enemy with unwavering force, holding them in a firm embrace. Then, two swift-moving wings, the horns, would sweep around the sides, flowing like water to encircle the foe completely. A final group, held in reserve, acted as the loins, ready to step in wherever they were most needed. This strategy was not merely effective. It was a beautiful and terrible dance of motion and power, a testament to a mind that saw the art of battle in the world around him. Through these changes, Shaka built not just an army, but a living, breathing force, disciplined, confident, and bound together by a shared purpose and an unbreakable will. In the natural course of time, a message arrived that his father, the chief of the small Zulu clan, had passed from this world. With the steadfast support of his mentor, Chief Dingiswayo, Shaka gathered his courage and returned to the home that had once cast him out. There, he confronted the half-brother who had taken the throne, and in the manner of those days, secured his own right to lead. Thus, Shaka became the chief of the Zulu, yet he remained a loyal friend under the wise and protective wing of Dingiswayo. But the winds of fate are ever-changing. A great sadness soon fell upon the land when the noble Dingiswayo was betrayed and slain by his arch-rival, a powerful chief named Zwide. With their great leader gone, the alliance of clans he had built began to tremble and fall apart. Into this emptiness, Shaka stepped forward, his heart heavy with both grief and purpose. He gathered the leaderless warriors who had once followed Dingiswayo, folding their strength into his own. Then he turned his gaze and his perfected army towards Zwide, seeking justice for his fallen friend. The battle that followed was a mighty struggle for the future of the land. Though Zwide's forces were like a great river in number, Shaka's warriors stood firm as a mountain. Using the brilliant horns of the buffalo formation, the Zulu army encircled their enemies, and Shaka's tactics proved as decisive as the rising sun. To avenge his mentor, the legends whisper that Shaka sought out Zwide's own mother, who was said to practice dark arts. The tales say he delivered a terrible punishment, leaving her in a hut with wild, hungry creatures, and then ensuring that the entire structure was consumed by fire, a final, dreadful act of retribution. With his rivals now scattered or joined to his banner, Shaka became the undisputed master of all the region. His conquests, however, sent ripples of fear across the subcontinent. So great was the might of his armies that many other tribes chose to flee rather than face him, beginning a vast migration known as the Mfikane, or the Crushing. This movement of peoples reshaped the map of the land itself. Before long, Shaka ruled over a vast kingdom of 250,000 souls, and his army was a force of countless thousands. But this great empire was built upon a foundation of fear, and its mighty architect was soon to face a sorrow so profound that it would threaten to unravel the very fabric of his being. For all the fear he inspired in the hearts of warriors and chiefs, there remained one soul to whom Shaka's heart was forever soft and open: his mother, Nandi. She was the one who had walked with him through the lonely years of exile, her love a steady flame in the cold winds of hardship. When he rose to power, his first thought was for her, raising her to the highest honor as his queen mother and most trusted advisor. In her calming presence, his fierce temper would often settle, and his sharp edges would soften. She was his anchor, the single, gentle thread that connected the mighty king to the memory of the boy he once was. Then, in the month when the rains began to soften the earth, a great silence fell. Nandi, his beloved mother, passed from the world. For Shaka, This was not merely a sadness to be born. It was as if the sun had been plucked from the sky, leaving him in a perpetual, starless night. A profound and terrible grief overtook him, a storm of anguish that would soon sweep across his entire kingdom. The brilliant mind that had conceived great strategies and built a nation now began to fracture, consumed by a single devastating thought, that his personal sorrow must be felt by every living soul under his rule. What followed was a reign of sorrow, enforced by the spear. He declared a full year of mourning, and in his broken state, he issued decrees that made little sense. He commanded that no crops were to be planted, a sentence of hunger for his people who lived by the land. He forbade anyone from drinking milk, a staple of their diet, and in a moment of chilling madness, ordered that cows should be slaughtered. He declared that their calves must understand the agony of losing a mother, and that the sound of their hungry cries would be a fitting song for a nation in mourning. His gaze, once fixed on enemies beyond the borders, now turned inward with a terrifying ferocity. At his mother's funeral, he watched his people, and any person he judged to be weeping too little was seized and put to death. He forbade any man and woman from being together, and those who were found to be expecting a child faced the same cruel fate. The kingdom, once vibrant and strong, was plunged into a deep freeze of fear. This was no longer the firm hand of a leader, but the desperate, flailing pain of a man who had lost his way entirely. And in the hushed spaces between the great crawls, his own family and most trusted advisers began to whisper with heavy hearts. They saw that the king who had built their home was now tearing it down with his own hands. The anchor was gone, and the great ship of the Zulu nation was being dashed upon the rocks of his sorrow. They were faced with a choice more terrible than any battle: to stand by and watch their people perish, or to intervene and forever bear the weight of what must be done to save the kingdom from its own king. And so, while the king was lost in the storm of his own sorrow, a quiet and solemn agreement was being made in the shadows of the great royal kraal. This was not a rebellion of strangers, but a decision born within the very heart of Shaka's own family. The plotters were his own half-brothers, Dingaan and Mlangana, and a man who had enjoyed his deepest trust, his personal attendant, Mbopa. Dingaan and Mlangana had always walked in the long shadow cast by their famous brother. As sons of the former chief, they watched as Shaka, the once outcast, rose to a height they could never reach. Yet, their motives were woven from more than just ambition. They saw the land suffering, the fields lying empty, and the people living in constant fear. They came to believe that the kingdom Shaka had built with such strength was now being destroyed by his own hand. In their hearts, they could justify their terrible choice as a necessary one, to save the Zulu nation from its king. But the most piercing betrayal came from Mbopa. He was no mere servant. He was a respected advisor who stood at the king's side, a witness to every decree and every flash of fury. He had seen how the king's grief had extinguished his mercy, and he knew that in this new reign of terror, no one was safe, not even those who were most loyal. Some whispers of the time suggest he was guided by the counsel of Shaka's own aunt, a wise and formidable woman of the royal house who also feared for her people's future. For whatever reason, Mbopa made his choice, and his role was crucial. He was the keeper of the king's schedule and his gate, the one who could quietly open the door for the fateful meeting. The conspirators knew they had only one chance. A previous attempt had faltered, lost to fear and poor timing. They could not challenge the lion in open combat. Then the moment arrived. In the month of September, Shaka, in his restless state, had sent the main body of his formidable army on a long journey to the north. This left his royal capital, Bulawayo, feeling strangely empty and still, guarded only by a few. For Dingain, Mlangana, and Mbopa, this was the sign they had awaited. The king's fierce protectors were far away, and the path was clear. They knew there would never be another opportunity as perfect as this one. On a day in September, a deceptive calm had settled over the royal kraal of Bulawayo. With the great army far to the north, the familiar sounds of drilling warriors were absent, leaving an eerie stillness in the air. King Shaka was holding court, seated upon a rock in the vast cattle enclosure as he met with envoys who had come to pay their respects. He felt secure in his own home, relaxed and without his usual guards, never suspecting that the gravest danger was not from beyond his borders, but from the shadows just a few paces away. His half-brothers, Dingain and Mlangana, waited silently, their hands gripping the very kind of short stabbing spear that Shaka himself had made famous. The final piece of their plan rested with Mbopa, the king's most trusted attendant. As Shaka spoke with the visitors, Mbopa suddenly created a loud and angry disturbance, shouting at the envoys and causing a commotion. Distracted by the noise, Shaka turned toward his servant, his expression one of confusion, and asked what was the matter. That single moment of diverted attention was all that was needed. Dingain and Mlangana burst from their hiding place. They were no longer brothers, but assassins moving with swift and terrible purpose. They closed the distance before anyone could react. The sharp, familiar blades of the Ikawa spear found their mark, plunging into the king's body. In his final, shocked moments, a heartbreaking question is said to have escaped his lips. "Are you stabbing me, kings of the earth?" Another legend tells that he offered a prophetic warning, looking past his brothers to utter, "You will not rule, for the swallows will come to rule." He spoke of the white settlers, whose mud brick houses resembled swallows' nests, foreseeing a time when foreign powers would descend upon the land his brothers hoped to command. The attack was over in moments. The great king, the builder of a nation, fell lifeless to the dust of his own compound. There were no grand ceremonies, no year of mourning for the man who had demanded so much grief from his people. The conspirators, wishing to erase his memory quickly, carried his body to an empty grain pit and placed him inside. They covered him with stones and earth, leaving him in an unmarked and forgotten grave. To this day, the exact resting place of Shaka Zulu remains a mystery, a silent testament to the tragic and tumultuous end of the lion who once ruled the plains. In the quiet that followed the king's fall, a deep tremor passed through the Zulu Kingdom. The first act of the new rulers was one of cold necessity, and more blood was soon to be spilled. The fragile alliance between the brothers Dingain and Mlangana shattered almost at once. Proving himself as ruthless as the brother he had helped to overthrow, Dingain swiftly arranged for Mlangana to be killed. The trusted attendant, Mbopa, who had opened the gate for the betrayal, also vanished from history, likely meeting a similar, silent end. With all rivals for the moment removed, Dingain declared himself the new king. Eager to secure his reign, Dingain moved quickly to heal the wounds Shaka's grief had inflicted. He lifted the harsh decrees, allowing his warriors to marry, his people to plant crops, and the kingdom to drink milk once more. These acts brought a wave of relief across the land and won him the support of both the army and the people. Yet, his rule was founded upon a murder, and fear was its constant companion. He launched a terrible purge, hunting down and executing any who were still loyal to Shaka's memory. The Zulu Kingdom endured, but the fiery spirit of expansion that had defined it was now extinguished. A new and different challenge soon appeared on the horizon, one that would define Dingain's rule. These were the Voortrekkers, settlers from the south, moving inland with their wagons and their own fierce determination. The clash between these two powerful forces was inevitable and bloody. In a fateful act of treachery, Dingaan had their leader, Piet Retief, and his entire delegation of about 100 men killed during what was supposed to be a peaceful negotiation. This deed sparked a furious retaliation. Later that same year, at a place now called the Battle of Blood River, a small group of Voortrekkers, protected by their wagons and their guns, faced the full might of the Zulu army. The result was a terrible slaughter, with thousands of Zulu warriors falling before the relentless gunfire. This defeat shattered the aura of Dingaan's power. His own half-brother, Mpand, whom he had thought too weak to be a threat, saw his opportunity. Allying with the newcomers, Mpand raised an army and overthrew him. Dingaan fled, a king without a kingdom, and was soon killed as a fugitive in a foreign land. The Zulu Kingdom would continue under new leaders, but it was now caught between the rising tides of colonial powers. The prophecy whispered to be Shaka's last words, that the swallows would come to rule, was unfolding. The great empire he had forged with such vision and force would ultimately fall to the British in the Anglo-Zulu War of 1879, just over 50 years after his own tragic end. And so, we are left to ponder the legacy of Shaka Zulu. How is such a man to be remembered? Was he a heroic founder, a symbol of immense strength and pride? Or was he a tyrant whose wars cast a long shadow of suffering across the land? The truest answer lies not in one or the other, but in the difficult acceptance of both. He was, without question, a genius of his age, a visionary who saw a single, powerful nation where others saw only scattered clans. With an iron will and a brilliant mind, he forged an empire through strength and strategy. Yet, that very same focus, that relentless drive, curdled in the crucible of his own power and personal sorrow. The unbreakable will that built a kingdom became the unyielding madness that terrified it. His life stands as a poignant lesson, reminding us that the very qualities which can raise a great empire, ambition, ruthlessness, an unwavering spirit, can also become the very instruments of its downfall. His death at the hands of those closest to him was more than just the fall of a king. It was the tragic and seemingly inevitable final chapter for a leader whose greatness was ultimately matched by the depth of his own tyranny. The king who had commanded vast armies was brought down not on a distant battlefield, but in the heart of his own home by a few men armed with spears and a desperate purpose. This is the timeless and solemn tale of Shaka Zulu. It is a story of dazzling creation and profound destruction, woven together into the complex tapestry of a single, unforgettable life. It speaks across the centuries of the double-edged nature of power, and how even the most mighty of rulers can be undone by the shadows cast by their own actions.